Hi, welcome to State of AV in the Smart Built Environment. Thank you for joining us today. KNX and AV both live in the built environment, an environment that's changed rapidly in the past few years as it embraces digitalization and an IP backbone. In this executive panel, the leaders in the AV community will discuss the impact of those changes and how technology has brought KNX and AV even closer together. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to introduce our panel today. We have Mike Blackman, who is the Managing Director of Integrated Systems Events. We have Sarah Joyce, the Chief Global Officer of Avixa. Walt Zerb, who is the Senior Director of Technology and Standards at CEDIA. And of course, Franz Kammerl, who is the President of the KNX Association. Thank you, panel, and welcome here on stage at KNX. I'd like to start off today's discussion by turning to Mike Blackman and saying, Mike, I thought we might start with you because KNX community has enjoyed your ISE event for the past years. And in fact, we're probably online today virtually because, like all major events, ISE has been disrupted by the pandemic. Otherwise, we'd all be joining you. But perhaps you could give us a quick update on ISE and ISE Digital.
Generally, what we would see is a hall full of smart building companies. And we've been proud to work with KNX to build that over the number of years. Unfortunately, this year we've had to move ISE and it's reduced in size. And we have an event that starts tomorrow here in Barcelona that's really just a taste of what ISE will be. We're running parallel with that online as well. So KNX is the main sponsor for that online event, ISE Digital, and we will be presenting a few panels and streams focused on smart building as well. We're happy to bring along other companies who are in this sector and highlight how smart building technology has become quite significant, particularly in this pandemic era where we see, touchless, AI, control of buildings, etc., being quite significant and actually being a solution to the pandemic.
And Mike, you're actually on site now, right? And I think you arrived there by motorbike, with some colleagues. I saw that on social media. I thought, how cool.
Well, we figured out it's the first time ever that ISEs have taken place in the summer. And a few of the guys said, hey, why don't we take this opportunity to ride there and do some social media and PR on the way? And I said, that sounds great. At least I can do one thing of actually having some fun on the way to an event. We had a great group. We visited some clients on the way. We went with two colleagues from Lang AV, from Peter Shadle from Avixa, and Ruben Dalmar, who's the sales director of FIRA. So we had a nice diverse group there running through and visiting clients and enjoying the ride.
How wonderful to hear that in this time, especially. So Mike, you've managed to put together these diverse elements, to create the world's largest AV show. You've been able to put together AV leaders like Crestron and Barco, with global giants like Samsung and LG, with smart building companies like Belden, Young, Rayco, Seidel, Steinel, and of course KNX. How did you find the common ground, and how were you able to bring that together?
It was actually quite a challenge to start with. We realized very early that looking at how we approach the commercial building market, we needed to actually help companies like Crestron, and we saw KNX as a way to actually approach that market and get more and more of the companies who are actually doing installations in buildings, who are actually working in that sector. We started very small with a very small pavilion. Bob, you will recall, I think back in 2007, the very first smart building pavilion at ISE, and it's built up to become its own hall now. We will see that growing again, particularly here in Barcelona with more space. And the conference we run there has been one of the catalysts to actually building this part of the exhibition and attracting not only the exhibitors, but those architects, designers, integrators, those who are involved in actually creating and designing commercial buildings.
Thank you, Mike, and we all envy you being on site there. I'd like to turn to Sarah now and just ask Sarah, VIX is a co-owner of ISE, and you have 20,000 global members leading in the commercial AV industry. So from your perspective, how has the industry of AV changed in the past 5 years? And what is the biggest challenge in AV at the moment as you see it?
Hello, Bob. Thank you. I don't have the soundtrack of the FIRA behind me at the moment, but I'm also delighted to say that I'm in Barcelona, ready to enjoy 2 days of ISE. Goodness, what a 5 years of change we've had in the industry. I think I've been in the industry over 20 years, and this is the most rapid period and pace of change I've ever experienced. You mentioned it in your introduction, digitalization, and that pre-pandemic and of course during has been the greatest shift and market change. The digital transformation that organizations and governments have accelerated, the rapid proliferation of unified communications, which has kept organizations and countries, economies, governments communicating during these past incredibly difficult 15, 18 months for everybody around the world. I think what we've seen, certainly within AVIXA, our digital transformation strategy that we had for a 3-year plan, we accelerated and delivered within a year. And that's what I see as the importance that organizations, users, and the integrators, the consultants, the designers, as you spoke about as well, Mike. It's that importance around data-driven business decisions and being able to combine data quickly, present data and communicate data quickly. We've been living in an AV IT world for many, many years, but that pace of digital change has what is I think the greatest opportunity. To your question about challenge, Bob, I think it's what's giving people the greatest opportunity. That's what we've experienced in these last 5 years.
Thank you, Sarah. And if anybody else would like to comment on that, feel free to jump in. But I think it was initially some resistance on the part of the industry to say, well, IT is coming in, and now I think clearly the large majority has accepted it as something that is our future as well as the future of the industry. And Sarah, what about the professional requirements to make an AV installation? What are those skill sets that you think are the proper background to cope with AV technology?
Well, what it's done, of course, is broaden skill sets. I mean, if you think about the essential need, of course, for engineering, for design, for project management, for safety understanding, and very specialized skill sets, it's brought in that need for the IT communication, the networking skills. I firmly believe that certainly with the proliferation of smart buildings, certainly what we've seen with digital transformation, that AV has that equal strong place alongside IT, alongside facilities. It has that seat at the table where it is in direct dialogue at the outset with the architects, with the consultants. And so therefore the skill set mix has changed and broadened, and all important communication skills. You're dealing with a different client and you're dealing with different influencers within that mix as well. So the essentials of, as we say, the essentials that certainly within AVIXA that we look at and provide through CTS, through CTSI, the installation specialism, and CTSD, and everything that's been expanded, CTSD being the design specialism, and everything that's being expanded within that to give those networking skills is core to the world that our members and CDS members as well around the world are now engaging in.
I think particularly in the smart building, when the focus changed from the building itself to the occupants, to focus on the people-centric building, suddenly AV grew tremendously in importance and became much more of a focus in that. And maybe at this point I should turn to Walt and address Walt, from the CEDIA point of view, as the Global Association for Home Technology, what changes have you seen in the residential technology in the past 5 years?
Hi, Bob. Hey, thanks for having me on today. Gosh, there's been a lot of changes in 5 years. And we could have probably an entirely dedicated session, probably just to that. But if I had to say what the big things have been, and Sarah just hit on this, networks, of course, have become paramount, and enterprise grade networks. Having really good Wi-Fi to be able to roam, and hopefully the adoption of more wired technologies. For instance, if things are stationary, they need to have Ethernet to them, and if they're not stationary, then Wi-Fi is okay. Otherwise, we've seen the explosion of the Internet of Things, which has entered this space in 5 years, and media has had a rebirth again. So through the likes of Spotify and Tidal and all the other international music services, as well as with most recently with the pandemic, first run movies now being offered in the home. Media is off to an amazing start with immersive audio leading that charge as probably one of the greatest opportunities we've had in a long time in the home space.
Certainly. Well, when we talk about the growth in streaming and the amount of investment that the streaming companies are putting into generating content, I think that reflects exactly what you're saying in the amount of interest that's picking up in the home technology area. But what recommendations might you have for professionals willing to start, doing their integration of AV projects in smart homes and buildings? What do you think first steps are?
Well, first steps always have to start with education. You're going to need to know your fundamentals, and CEDIA as well as Avixa do spend a fair amount of time on recommended practices and standards, as well as education and certification. So knowing where to put speakers, knowing where to put video displays, knowing about knowing about display calibration, making sure your colors are right. There's just so much in the area of education that that needs to be done. The other thing that really needs to happen is people are going to need to have outreach to builders and architects and like trades. You're going to need to be a master of collaboration, a master of dealing with other people, so that you can working with the designers. So maybe the speaker needs to go there, but maybe it can't go there because aesthetics rule, which usually happens. It's always a balance of compromises when you try to put any type of a system together in a residence, and there's a lot of stakeholders. So being able to collaborate really well is going to be very, very important.
And isn't that the advantage of our AV integrators, both in home and commercial? The fact that they are experienced in integrating different technologies and bringing different disparate standards together to have them function and to cooperate with one another.
Yep, absolutely. And gosh, there's just so much we could talk about it. You just need to really spend a lot of time. The recent kick that we're on right now, especially post-COVID, is the empathy side. And this is, a lot of people typically have more specified products than designed products. And design is all about understanding each individual member of that household. So you're going to need to have a lot bigger skills with empathy, being able to actually get into somebody else's shoes, so to speak, and understand what they're into, and deliver hopefully as seamless a solution as you can that meets the needs of every individual family member that's in that particular residence.
That's certainly a challenge. And what is the benefit of introducing KNX to AV systems? We'll get to the vice versa in a minute, but well, from an AV point of view, what is the benefit for introducing KNX to AV systems?
Well, I mean, KNX is it's established, it's been around a long time, it's solid, and there are so many choices. I think one of the main benefits I can see personally from KNX is there's so many choices of display options, of ID. So if you need something modern, if you need something, brass, if you need something glass, there's just so many choices. It's readily available and it's rock solid. So I think AV to me, or a KNX to me, is kind of a no-brainer for AV because it's already a proven control standard and it's around. It's more the vice versa that I think might be the larger benefit. And I'm just going to go ahead and roll right into that one since you asked. The big vice versa part is so we've had a lot of great stuff with lighting control and with security and with access and a whole bunch of other things with KNX. But what the AV element brings into it is you being able to get into things such as wellness or immersive spaces. Even when we talk about and wellness, again, we could do a whole independent episode on this, but wellness might be that I need a space that's quiet and has soothing music that surrounds me, that is also integrated with color changing lights so that we can get the temperature right. It might be sound masking because you live in somewhere that's noisy and we need to make it quiet. So the vice versa part, I think, is probably the largest opportunity. Bringing AV in with KNX means you can offer a lot more complete solutions in the residence.
And would you say, or how complicated would you say that it is for working with KNX and an AV setup?
So I think the KNX part would be making a good, easy user interface for people to use. And that the real complexity runs into needing to know all the systems. So I'd say the first thing someone looking to get AV into KNX needs to do is get a bunch of gear and play with it. You're going to need to know it inside and out. And one of the areas that's going to be one of your most challenging is media management. As this device offers this service and this device offers this service, and then as licensing agreements change, and now this device doesn't offer this service, you're going to need to know that, and you're going to need to be able to assist the end user in saying, they'll say, I'm into watching this particular sports team, and I like these types of movies. You're going to need to know how to deliver that. You're going to need to know how to have this box deliver that for this thing, this box deliver that for this thing, and then make it controllable. And you would never do that unless you have 100% confidence that you really understand the gear. And then you also understand the user action. So I guess it's not complicated. You need to be competent, and you'll need to take education so that you can be competent, and then it will not be difficult.
So it's a learnable skill, in other words.
Oh, yes.
Like our other learnable skills, we had to learn a lot about IP networking.
100% learnable. Yep.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think
Sure.
Apologies, Bob. I loved Wolf. I loved what you said about the people-centric design, because I think that's what we're going to. We've talked about the past 5 years. What are we coming to? If we think about how we're coming out of the pandemic and how organizations, particularly in every market, are going to be bringing people back into work or back into retail and entertainment venues. If you think about where our core skills for AV professionals right at the outset at looking at that design, we've broadened now the consideration and skill sets needed in design principles. And if you think about the tools used, BIM particularly, even 5 years ago, we in the AV world, we were really only just starting to talk about and being, BIM being a tool that was being used in new builds. And, digital twin and the ability as well with that overlay and Sentry overlay, we're in a different language. So, I loved what you said, Walt, and I just wanted to add that piece about that consideration of the people-centric design, but the practical considerations in our world where we are training people, where we're bringing people back into a workforce, that there are the tools and the skills now to be able to give AV professionals across Pro AV, across residential, all of the spaces, those additional skills to anticipate what's coming. And those additional skills to think about how organizations are going to look absolutely at wellness absolutely at their employees and how they work and the spaces they want to work in. Obviously, safety. Obviously, occupancy management is going to be important. Safety procedures are going to be important. So we can sort of peel those layers back now to look at the principles of how a design engineer, an AV professional, is engaged with the architects, as well as you said, with the consultants, to really anticipate usage of, I know I'm saying building, but it could be a theatre, it could be a shop. All of these principles are exactly the same, and the technology is across every one of those markets, residential, of course, media. So whilst we've gone through a time of such challenge, those opportunities now are really coming through to think about how we're going to be working and living again. And they come back to the core principles of what do we do in our AV world? How do we design systems? How do we build systems? How do we anticipate?
Yeah, Bob, and Sarah, I love what you said too. So we can just go back and forth and love on each other's comments, because I think you were spot on there as well. We're guilty. Here's the other thing, Bob. Our industry is guilty of focusing on the tech, and it's not about the tech. When someone buys, let's say, a car, unless they're really into cars, they're not looking at all the individual tech that's in that car. It's an experience. They're driving a BMW because it delivers this. They're driving a Cadillac because it delivers that. That's what we need to get our minds around. Don't get hung up on the tech. Don't get hung up on specifying. Get hung up on the solutions and the human-centric side of it, and just deliver something that's usable and improves the human condition. That is ultimately what we need to be doing. And just don't get hung up on the tech. It's about just making people's lives better for where they live, basically.
I like to think that AV, it's combining the magic and the science with the physics, obviously, because it is about the magic. It is about the experience. The technology is phenomenal. If you think about what we've got, what we can use now, the constant innovation in technical products, phenomenal. But you need that magic to be able to put that experience together, particularly in a people-centric way.
And again, the point is that for years, AV has been doing that magic of integrating disparate pieces. And in the building area, there's a lot of people who haven't had any experience because they've been siloed. And there are no, to my knowledge, no channel that's been existing that handles smart building. They're all being created, and this category of master systems integrator is open for any group of install-wise people that can get their hands around a bunch of new areas and pull them together. And I'm going to come back to Mike in a minute, because I think this also has impact for ISE. But let me jump back to Franz, because we've been talking a lot about the future of the AV industry, but we should talk about the future of how KNX intersects well with this outlook. So Franz, how will the development of KNX IoT benefit the integration of AV systems for KNX?
I guess this is the first choice now to bring KNX on the IoT level, and that gives the opportunity for all the other industry to interconnect with the KNX system on different levels, on different ways. But then it's clear that they are not fighting with specific communication systems and layers or something like that. It's just the application that is driving that, and we all are working on the same communication technology, which is then IoT or IP based. And we already started to develop that. We already are on the way to bring offering into the market. And I guess this is a good opportunity also then that we can interact with the AV industry in a much better way than in the past. Because we are coming from the building automation areas, covering all the applications. And the benefit what we are bringing with us is that we are completely independent from any manufacturer. We always gave the message, all devices coming with a KNX logo on the market has to interwork. And the second benefit is that we do have one integration tool which is able to handle all the devices they are with KNX on the market. So I guess this is a good opportunity or a good starting point then also to address the AV industry. And on the other side, to give the KNX installers, which are specialists in their profession, that they have the possibility to interact with AV when there is the possibility and the request from the market.
And there's no reason why traditional KNX integrators and traditional AV integrators can't form partnerships and work together. I mean, this is being done constantly in different ways, whether it's through partnership or mergers or acquisitions. There are ways for the two to come together because everything is coming together in that. Franz, I wanted to mention because I had the opportunity to make a speech at ISE 2020 on IoT again, which was a very big concern about security, and particularly with IoT. But can you address KNX and security at the moment?
We covered this point already and prepared ourselves with our specifications. Years ago, we started to do that. And in the meantime, we can say, okay, we do have a high level of cybersecurity available. And this is based on KNX IP secure or on KNX, which is pure on twisted pair or radio frequency, and made that secure to protect at the end our customers by cybersecurity attacks. But this will not be the end. When we are jumping into KNX IoT, then we are entering into a next level of IoT security, or KNX security, and we will add there the latest available technology as well, so that we are approved to survive in the future. Because cybersecurity, I always say it's a race. It's a race between the people that are offering the devices and the people that are trying to hack that. And at the moment, we are ahead of that hackers, but we have to improve ourselves constantly. When we are slowing down, maybe then we could come into trouble.
Thank you, Franz. And I think what the panel has done is at least explained the symbiotic nature of KNX and AV in the common built environment. If anybody wants to comment on that, feel free to join in. The thing I would like to turn to is Mike, because Mike, obviously the pandemic has changed a lot of things, in the trade show business, but at the same time, doesn't it create, ISE is the bazaar of the industry where we go to find things and solutions. And what everybody's talking about here is a lot of new requirements caused by the pandemic. Doesn't that give ISE an even wider range to look at?
Well, obviously, Bob, one of the things we're always very wary of at ISE is to keep our focus on what the show is about. So we're not trying to be all things to all people. But what we've seen very clearly is our industry being very innovative and creating solutions. I mentioned already about building entry systems, and these are things that we put into place. We've already put a couple of things in. We know Mobile World is doing that as well, where in the future we may actually have face recognition working with our badges. These are sort of things you already see in buildings. I recently read an article about I can't remember the name of the building in Dublin, which is one of the smartest buildings in Ireland, where it's fully automated. Each employee just carries a fob, and it knows when they get in which floor they're going to, and they're taking them directly there. So there's very little interaction. So we're starting to look at things like this and saying, okay, what other aspects of smart building or AV can we add to the portfolio that interacts or adds to the whole solution rather than just products? So yes, we are looking at it, but we're being very, very careful to focus or to keep our focus. I've heard a lot of criticism and comments about shows where they just grab and try to address everything. There are shows we've seen where they start to have aspects of AV, like digital screens, digital walls, which have been nothing to do with what they are, and they're trying to attract new audiences like that. If we lose our focus of what we do, I think we'll alienate our core audience. So yes, we do want to expand. Yes, we do want to address the elements which are relevant to our market, but we still want to keep a clear track of what we're doing. Now, smart building as part of ISE was a slight digression, but very, very relevant. We've got more and more elements like smart entry. You'll see companies like Warbird or those who actually offer entry systems, or I don't know, it's growing and growing, but it's focused on the connection with the smart building.
Yeah, I think that's the point, that I was trying to underline, is that AV itself, when it goes onto an IP backbone, there are more opportunities and technologies that come along and start to be, part of the mix. And, without losing focus, I guess, what you're saying, Mike, is you have to wait for them to come to the industry to be part of it. So.
We're not waiting for them to come. Obviously, we're looking the whole time. And, it's funny talking to people and listening to Sarah and Dave Labuscas talking about the AV industry and how it touches everything. Almost, and it's interesting when you try, people say to me, well, Mike, what do you do? And I try to explain the industry we're involved in. And the only way I can actually make it relate to them is to tell them where they're experiencing it. Whether it's digital signage in a hotel or a shopping center, or whether it's actually watching TV at home. As long as you can show them how it's related, then you start to see the relevance. So we're not waiting for them to come to us. We're looking to see, how does it relate to us? How can we show that it's relevant? And very clearly what Fran said, what Sarah said about IoT, that's the backbone. The networks are the backbone that connects everything for us to actually say, this is why it's relevant. This is why we can include that as part of what ISE is about. At the end of the day, it's very much to do with our audience. If we have an architect and his requirements show different platforms or different sectors of what he requires, then we should show it here.
I can't help but appreciate how your talk is being punctuated by the actual construction of the site behind you. It's really so much in character, that you should always carry that sound, with you. But so if I can, turn to the panel for anybody to talk, but this symbiotic nature of KNX and AV, KNX. If let me see if I can remember, Franz, you correct me if I'm wrong, but KNX has a very large majority share of the market in smart home and building automation, particularly in Europe, just a lion's share and the dominant lion, if I might, be so bold there. So
that's right, yeah. I guess that's right. In Europe and Asia, we are definitely number one, and where we are a little bit behind the market figures is clearly it's the Americas, the northern part of America, because this is dominated from company-specific solutions. But I can recognize that now there starts that the way of thinking is changing, and I guess they are coming up with at the end of the day an interworking solution, or a solution which has the capability to interwork. Maybe there's an opportunity to bring KNX in the United States into a better position as well. Because as long as there are just company-specific solutions, then these are silos. And I guess the time for the silos is over. We are now entering into a new area that who is willing to share will win. Who is not willing to share will lose. This is always what I'm saying to my people in the association, and we have to be prepared to share.
it sounds like excellent advice. And again, I just recently interviewed the integrator who was involved with the first KNX commercial building in America. So
okay.
things are coming along and going along in that. So, I think here, there are some other questions, but I think we've kind of covered some of those. So maybe we can open it up to the panel, for comments. And I think, Walt, you had mentioned wellness being such a huge, opportunity. And I think with the pandemic, whether it's a trade show, KNX or AV, we're all concerned about wellness. Maybe you could talk about that for a minute.
Well, sure. Gosh, wellness. So what's interesting about any of these terms that we use, they're all recipes, and then the tools are all the core skills. So wellness, there's nothing happening in wellness that is different as far as the skills you need to pull things off. The only real thing that's happening with wellness that will be different is being the general contractor that works with all the rest of the trades, because wellness has a water element, it has an air element, it has an electricity element. The other thing it has is, of course, lighting is quite important in that, but lighting design, and lighting design is a thing among itself. You might be able to install the actual infrastructure for lighting, whether that be low voltage or high voltage, but the actual design, color, temperature, location, type of fixtures, that's an actual legitimate trade that you would need to be able to work with people that can pull that off. And wellness can be many different degrees. It might be, we just need a really quiet space to work. We need a really quiet space to learn. We want to escape and have the suspension of disbelief by being entertained by music or a movie or an exercise studio that has, displays all the way around it. So I guess wellness is such a large catch-all term, but people are seeking this. So I think it's definitely a massive opportunity. And back to what Franz was saying about sharing. I'm very happy to see that the Matter is happening, which used to be called CHIP, which is a universal language that some of the larger players today are starting to put together so that devices can interoperate together. And I've been saying this for years because we had it a long time ago for those of us who are musicians with something called MIDI, musical instrument digital interface, and it just grew the pie. It was wonderful. You wanted a piece of equipment that could talk to another piece of equipment. So we are seeing finally more collaboration and less walled gardens, which I 100% am in total support for.
Walt doesn't know this, but he's just triggered a chance for Franz to talk about IP bliss.
I know it. Oh, I didn't know that.
Maybe we can say some words.
Franz, would you like to mention about IP bliss?
Yeah, okay. What we have learned, the different associations, and the associations are BACnet, Thread, Zigbee, KNX, and in the meantime, Daily joined as well. What we have learned is that we all have to do our marketing job to explain the market that IP is the future, and that we are wise when we are going together into that direction. And it's just a marketing initiative, but at the end of the day, it sets up specific boundary conditions because IP is not IP. So we need, there are in some definitions, they are clear that each and everyone can understand that. And what we intend as IP Bliss to explain to people, they are building specifiers that they can rely on us, because we are offering solutions based on a cybersecurity level, which gives them the opportunity to use the same network for all the different applications without and building up silos and giving the possibility that they can at least work on the same technical network.
Thank you, Franz. And I think we're coming out of time here. If anybody wants to add anything, fine. But if not, I'd like to try to summarize a little bit by saying it seems to me that KNX as being a dominant standard in the smart home and building automation area is the perfect environment for AV to grow out of rooms and smaller buildings into more rooms and bigger buildings, and gives a chance for all of us to work together and to meet each other at ISE regularly and to have a chance to grow both parts of the business. And thank you everybody on the panel for joining today. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Walt. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Franz. Appreciate your time and your input.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to see everyone.